Dr. King was a human being. He had a sense of humor, which was wonderful. It is very dangerous to make a person larger than life, because then young men and women are tempted to believe, well, if he was that great, he's inaccessible. And I can never try to be that, or emulate that, or achieve that. The truth is, Martin Luther King was a human being with a brilliant mind, a powerful heart, and insight, and courage, and also with a sense of humor. So he was accessible. I mentioned courage, and I would like to say something else about that, finding courage in the leaders and in you who will become leaders. Courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You see? You can't be consistently kind or fair or humane or generous, not without courage, because if you don't have it, sooner or later you'll stop and say, the threat is too much, the difficulty is too high, the challenge is too great. So I would like to say that Dr. King, while we know from all the publicity that he was brilliant and he was powerful, he was passionate and right, he was also a funny man. And that's nice to know. He was very young and very personable, so that he was really humble. And I want to speak also about that. I don't think modesty is a very good virtue, if it is a virtue at all. A modest person will drop the modesty any minute, you see. It's a learned affectation. But humility comes from inside out. Humility says, there was someone before me. Someone found the path. Someone made the road before me. And I have the responsibility of making the road for someone who is yet to come. Dr. King was really humble, so that he was accessible to everybody. The smallest child could come up to him. The most powerful person could come up to him. He never changed. You know, I mean, if somebody very rich and very powerful said, Dr. King, I want to speak to you, he was the same person to that person as he would be to one of you who is 16, 17, who'd say, Dr. King, he was still accessible, gentle, powerful, humble. I suppose courage would be the first of his many wondrous and wonderful qualities that I would list. The reason I do that, Miss Wallace, is that I'm convinced that courage is the most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you cannot practice any other virtue consistently. You can be kind for a while, you can be generous for a while, you can be just for a while, or merciful for a while, even loving for a while. But it is only with courage that you can be persistently and insistently kind and generous and fair. So I think his the first virtue, the first element of his personality that I would extol would be courage. Those of us, or those who choose to think we have something to say, accept the fact that that's lonely. One already knows that there will be some adversaries, and according to what is at stake, the adversaries will be violent and more violent or less violent. One is sustained, though, in the belief that what one has to say is right, and right for the most people. And then one is sustained by one's loved ones. So that Dr. King had first his wife and family, And then the people who loved him really, really loved him. And I think that they and their undying, unswerving love sustained him, even in the loneliest of moments. Intelligence, a very profound intelligence. Now, that does not always go hand in hand with intellect. With Dr. King, it did. But I point out that intelligence is a separate gift for the benefit of students, so that they may think of themselves as intellectual and not very intelligent, or intelligent and not very intellectual. One hopes, of course, that they try to bring the two virtues, the two elements, into their lives at the same time. Dr. King was profoundly intelligent. That is to say, he was able to see, to examine, to analyze, to evaluate, to measure the climate of the times, the expediency of his calling, of his ministry. That's intelligence. Now, intellect, of course, helped him to be able to explain what he saw with grace and eloquence and wonderful quotations, whether from Paul Laurence Dunbar or Longfellow. That was out of the virtue of his studies. So I would say that intelligence was the next virtue. He cared about women. He cared about the poor. He cared about the Spanish-speaking. He cared about Jews. He cared about poor whites, the miners, and those who were having a very hard time. So that even as he was assassinated, he was planning a march on Washington called the Poor People's March, in which he had encouraged African Americans, white Americans, Spanish-speaking, Native American, Asian Americans, all of us to join and go to Washington and sit there in various tent cities in the nation's capital until something was done for the poor. I think some of the aspects of Dr. King, which are rarely mentioned, are necessary for young men and women to know about. Dr. King was not only a man of high moral values and, of course, intelligence and spirituality, he was also very funny. Very few people really know that he had a wonderful sense of humor and appreciated a good laugh. And I think that's important for young men and women to know, because the Bible says a cheerful spirit is good medicine. And Dr. King, in the face of the most horrid situations, the most cruel people, the most greedy and mean-spirited, he kept his spirit up, and quite often with a wonderful smile. It is not a past tense for me. Dr. King continues to impact upon my life as he does upon the lives of many people in the world. A dream, an idea never dies. It might go in or out of fashion, but it remains. And so his idea of fair play and justice still impacts upon me. He was a friend of mine. I worked with him, and Mrs. Coretta Scott King is a sister friend of mine today. So we are in sisterly touch, and the ideas which he embodied and subsequently gave to the world are ideas I'm still trying to flesh out in my own life. I'm trying to be that fair person, that kind person, that generous, courageous person, that loving person that Martin King was and encouraged us to become. the effect of a great man or woman is not always visible. That is to say, the very fact that we're having this conversation this morning, that there are thousands of young men and women around the country discussing, thinking about Martin Luther King, is evidence that his impact has reached you as well as me, and hundreds of millions of people. What it will mean, I pray, is that out of this kind of discussion and the various celebrations you will have and you have had, out of these celebrations, there will come an idea which may have its birth in your mind, Rosemary, and you may decide to make life better just for a minute and just in the place where you are. So if you don't think of having to be grown up and having to have power and money and prestige and name and all that, if you don't believe that that's the only way you can make a difference, you can be important, then you can start right now, just where you are, there in Missoula, being a better person yourself, being kinder, being more courteous, trying to be a better student, so that you will make an impact yourself on your nation, on your race, on your gender, and in fact on the world. The dream of Martin Luther King, for me, represents the best the human being can hope for. A world of peace, of development, a world of respect, a world where all men and women are valued, none higher than the other, none lower than the other, because of his or her color, or his or her race, or his or her religion, or cultural persuasion. That is the best we can hope for. And so when we speak of a dream, I think if Martin Luther King said he had a dream, I think this is the dream of America. This is us at our best. I've been so pleased to see young men and women do the poem. Young black men and young black women and young white men and women, and Spanish speaking, sometimes 12 years old and 9 years old, standing, I have a dream, and with the passion and fervor of youth, and it's just, it tells me so clearly that the speech as much as the man belonged to us all. The music of the I Have a Dream speech is a replication of the music which comes out of the mouths of the African-American preacher, singer, blues singer, jazz singer, rap person. It is it's so catching, so hypnotic, so wonderful that that as a poet I continue to try to catch it, to catch the music. And if I can catch the music and have the content as well, then I have the ear of the public. And I know that that's what Martin Luther King was able to do, not just in the I Have a Dream speech, although that has become a kind of poem which is used around the world, but in everything he said. There was the black Southern Baptist or Methodist preacher singing his song, telling our story, not just black American story either, but telling the human story. And I mean, that if as a poet I can replicate that, I'm okay, Jack.
I have a dream. My poor little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. With this faith, we will be able to work together to pray together together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day. This will be the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
The substance is the issue which most moves you. If it is a love for civil rights, then that is the substance. How you get it over, you should be able to change style the same way you change your jackets.
Yes.
That is to say, in one circumstance, you might need to preach. In another circumstance, to get your idea over. In another, you may have to tell a joke. In another, you may have to sing some long, lonesome blues. In another, you may, I'm telling you, but you should be able to change that, be intelligent enough to know where to put what, so that you don't try to swim on the stove. You understand? And that's it. And you don't try to tap dance on the swimming pool. So then, if when you have the substance, you decide what style shall I deliver this? In which style shall I deliver this? Shall I be quiet and put my hand on my cheek and act as if I'm deep? Or shall I tell a joke, or shall I make myself a buddy to someone in order to get my substance over? You see, that's my encouragement. Well, there have been so many, and I hope still many. Certainly working for Dr. Martin Luther King was very important to me. Becoming a brother, developing a brother-sister relationship with Malcolm X has been very important to me. Being friends with Dr. Janetta Cole has been very important to me. The sisters and brothers that you make give you the materials with which your character uses to build itself. It is said that some people are born great, others achieve it, some have it thrust upon them. In truth, the ways in which your character is built have to do with all three of those. I'm not gainsaying geneticism, but those around you, those you choose, and those who choose you help you. But let me add this too. I'm a very religious person. And so it is the presence of God, the constant, unwavering, unrelenting presence of God, which continues to help me to keep a character which I'm proud to show to young men and women. And I will be, I hope, not too ashamed to meet my Maker in the final move. I was a mute from the time I was 7.5 until I was almost 13. I didn't speak. I had voice, but I refused to use it. My grandmother, who was raising me in a little village in Arkansas, used to tell me, "Sister, Mama don't care about what these people say. You must be an idiot. You must be a moron. Mama don't care, sister. Mama know when you and the good Lord get ready, you're going to be a preacher." Well, I used to sit and think to myself, poor ignorant Mama. She doesn't know I will never speak, let alone preach. It has devolved upon me to not preach, as it were, but to write about morals, about hope, about desolation, about pain and ecstasy and joy and triumph in the human spirit. So it seems to me that is my calling, and I write about it for all of us, because I know that human beings are more alike than we are unalike. I still have not realized my talents. I believe that each of us comes from the Creator trailing wisps of glory. So at this wonderful young age of 65, I don't know yet what the Lord has for me to do. I try to live up to the energy and to the calling. But I wouldn't dare say I have even scratched the surface yet. A Black person grows up in this country and in many places, knowing that racism will be as familiar as salt to the tongue, and that also it can be as dangerous as too much salt. I think that you agree that you must struggle for betterment for yourself and for everyone. It is impossible to struggle for civil rights, equal rights for Blacks without including whites, because equal rights, fair play, justice are all like the air. We all have it or none of us has it. That's the truth of it. I was very young in that little village in Arkansas, and there was a movie house downtown. Downtown consisted of one paved street. There was a movie house, and the girl who worked selling tickets lived on land my grandmother owned. And I knew for a fact that she and her family hadn't paid any rent for 3 years. They lived behind the town on our land. I went up to get a ticket. I may have been about 8 or 9. My grandmother was very religious and didn't believe in the movies. But once she allowed me and my brother, every now and again, we went up to get a ticket, and the girl took my dime, and she wouldn't put her hand on it. I put it down. She had a cigar box, and she took a card and raked my dime into the cigar box. Now, the white kids got tickets. She took their money, and she gave them little stubs. She didn't give us anything. She just motioned, which meant that we had to go up the side steps, outside steps, and crawl through a really crummy little door and sit pitched on these 3 or 4 benches to watch the movie. And all because I was Black. And I thought, well, I don't think I'll be going to the movies a lot. So I decided to boycott the movies. But that was the first time I can remember. And I must have been about 8 or 9. But mostly we lived on the Black side of town, and we didn't see other people very much. I cried a lot, and my brother, who was, well, he's always been the genius in my family. My family came closest to making a genius when they made my brother. He was 1.5 years older than I, and he told me they were stupid, they were ignorant, they were foolish. It didn't really, I mean, I agreed with all that because I knew he was smart, he would know, but it didn't diminish the hurt. I knew that if I was blonde and white-skinned, that wouldn't happen to me. It happened to me, Maya, who was Black. The truth is, you cannot get rid of it. It is there. What you can do is put positive things in there along with the negative. But it's a given that you will remember that the rest of your life. There's a poem, listen to this. It was written by County Cullen. It's called Incident. Once riding in old Baltimore, head filled, heart filled with glee, I saw a Baltimorean keep looking straight at me. Now, I was 8 and very small, and she was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But she stuck out her tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until December, and of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. people feel guilty, and guilt is stymieing. Guilt immobilizes. Guilt closes the air ducts and the veins and makes people ignorant. And so because they're guilty, they can't just say, listen, I feel guilty about your past. I feel guilty that you have lived this life of slavery and blah, blah, and this. I feel guilty. So what they do is they say, I'm going to smash your face. I'm going to trip you when you start running down the hill. I'm going to keep you out of my neighborhood because I can't come face to face with my guilt. In many cases, that's what's operating underneath. I raised a black boy. I defended myself first, and I raised a black boy, and I have black children, and I have gay friends and gay children, and I have defended whites. Well, yes. You see, I will not sit in a group of black friends and hear racial pejoratives against whites. I will not hear honky. I will not hear Jap. I will not hear kike. I will not hear greaser. I will not hear dago. I will not hear it. As soon as I hear it, I say, excuse me, I have to leave. Sorry. Or if it's in my home, I say, you have to leave. I can't have that. That is poison. And I know it is poison, and you're smearing it on me. I will not have it. Now, it's not an easy thing, and one doesn't all of a sudden sort of blossom into somebody who's courageous enough to say that. But you do start little by little. And you sit in a room and somebody says, if you're all white, and somebody says, well, the niggers, you may not have the courage right then, but you say, woo, my goodness, it's already 8 o'clock, I have to go, and leave. Little by little, you develop courage. You sit in a room and somebody says, well, you know what the Japs did then and what they're doing now. Say, I have to go. My goodness, it's already 6 o'clock. Leave. Continue to build the courage. Sooner or later, you'll be able to say out loud, just a minute, I defend that person. I will not have gay bashing, lesbian bashing, not in my company. I will not do it. When we talk about racism, we have to see that we're not just talking about acts against blacks. We're talking about vulgarities against any human being because of his race. This is vulgar. That's what it is. Whether it's an anti-Asian, whether it's the use of racial pejoratives about Jews, about Japanese, about Native Americans, about blacks, about Irish, it is stupid. Because what it is really is it is poison. It poisons the spirit, the human spirit. I know there are blacks who say, I can use the N-word because I mean it endearingly. I don't believe that. I believe it is vulgar and dangerous, given from any mouth to any ear. I know that if poison is in a vial, which says Poison, and has a skull and the crossbones, that is poison. But if you pour the same thing into Bavarian crystal, it is still poison. There's a line in Hamlet in which Hamlet's stepfather, who is really his uncle, is being berated by Hamlet. And Hamlet says, and the king said to Hamlet, you must remember, every father had a father. Now what that really means is, your parents are repeating what their parents told them, and their parents told them what had been told to them. Obviously, young man, you are breaking the mold. Thank God for that. So that when you have children, you will not tell the children what was told to you. This is the hope we have. This is why young people are the best we have and all we have. We have prayers and need and just terrible yearning that you young people will be able to break the mold. We are all in process, and that's what I mean again about intelligence and its value. We have all believed the most outrageous things at different times in our lives, and as the position became untenable, as we saw through that position we were holding, here's where courage comes in, to be able to say everybody, you know what I said yesterday, and said so fervently, and said with such passion? Well, I don't believe that anymore. I've been changed. Now that is courage. So that is, you have the courage, the insight to see and the courage to say. That was Martin, that was Malcolm, that was it. There was a time when Malcolm espoused the belief that all whites were blue-eyed devils, but he took his life in his own hands when he said publicly that he had been to Mecca, and there he saw blonde, blue-eyed men whom he could call brothers. He said, so everybody, what I said was wrong. Now that took an incredible amount of courage to say that, because after he said it, he didn't live very long. He was killed after he said that, but he did see it and he said it. And that has to be, I mean, one has to salute him. At first, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King were much more alike than they were unalike. Their methods of achieving the ends were different. Martin Luther King had been influenced by Mahatma Gandhi and the concept of nonviolent struggle. Malcolm X had been influenced by the head of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, and of course had lived a different life too, had lived in the streets and in prison. So his modus operandi was a different one than Martin Luther King. But essentially, at heart, they were very much alike. They wanted the best for their people. Now, Malcolm said for his people, but he changed too. And if you read the autobiography of Malcolm X by Mr. Haley, you will see toward the end of the book where I am mentioned in the book. Because Mr. Malcolm X came to Africa, and I was able, along with others, to help him to meet all the Africans of power in Ghana at the time. He said that he was coming back to the United States to say that he no longer believed that all whites were blue-eyed devils, that just being born white did not make a person evil. Now that took a lot of courage, because he had said so many times and so eloquently and with so much passion. But he changed, so that when he changed, he became again more in line with Martin Luther King than he had shown earlier. They were very much alike. It is of particular interest to see the men who have been important in our struggle. That is, one looks at Dr. King, a preacher, and Andrew Young, a preacher, and Jesse Jackson, a preacher, and Malcolm X, a preacher, and even today to see Louis Farrakhan, a preacher, to see that as a people we tend to be religious, whether we are following Buddha, or in some cases are Black Jews, or Muslims, or Christians, or Shintoists for that matter. I think that today, and that Million Man March, which must be talked about, that today one sees a beginning of a coming together of varying religious creeds. And that's a very good thing, because what I think Martin Luther King always said was human beings are more alike than we are unalike. I think affirmative action is affirmative action. I think it's good for the country. I think it seems on the face of it to be good for the minorities. But the truth is, it's good for the country. If the playing field was level for all people, then we wouldn't need affirmative action. But it's been terribly unlevel, terribly unfair for centuries. And in an effort to level the playing field for all people, we need Head Start and affirmative action and other attitudes and positions which will really cause us to see our nation as our nation and to cause us to be seen, at least striving for the level which the forefathers said they strove for. It is very important. Absolutely right. Unfortunately, I can't find many other isms that don't do the same thing, you see. So there is something, we are so new as a creature. I mean, we're the last group made, you know, and we just got here. The reptiles were on this little blob of spit and sand for 200 million years, and we just sort of grew this opposing thumb about 25 million years ago. So we're very new and very rude and very crass and shallow. And the only way we know to improve ourselves, for the most part, is by standing on somebody else's neck, not on their shoulders, but on their neck. And so I'm not asking for patience. Fortunately, it's given to young people to be impatient. If we weren't, we'd still be in the trees. Madame Sun Yat-sen said we still are in the trees. But so fortunately, young people are impatient. I do ask for intelligent viewing, intelligent assessment, intelligent analysis. I think that the Rodney King beating came out of the bad race relations. The Rodney King beating did not then cause only. It was caused by the sad state of race relations in our country. And I'm afraid that a number of people can be charged with the sad state of race relations in our country. And I mean that leaders are responsible for a great deal, because we have, as a people, we have in many cases given over, ceded our own independence and our own thoughts to leaders. And if leaders then mislead us, we tend to follow, unfortunately. I do hope that young men and women who are watching this program and these programs and others who you will talk to, with whom you interact, will start to think for themselves and start to take responsibility for their own thoughts. At present, we are not doing a very good job, except in the last election. We haven't done a very good job of thinking for ourselves. And so we've allowed ourselves this actually horrendous climate in which synagogues are vandalized, in which Asians are beaten, in which Native Americans, in which gays are bashed, in which single white boys are beaten, rapes are at an escalated level. But something terrible has happened, and so it is up to you. There it is. My heart is so heavy when I see the reality of the Indian reservation. And as an American, I know I'm too responsible. I am an Indian. I'm everything. And so at once I feel for the poverty and take great delight in the woman who says, I want to raise my children in the traditional way so that they will love the earth. I see us in the most complex, enigmatic puzzle, which of course is life. The need we have to see ourselves in each other and admit what we see is so great. The Native American will only be able to break that cycle when the larger society says these people are Americans and deserve everything all Americans have. The Black American will only be able to break this cycle of poverty and violence and child abuse and early death through drugs when the larger society and the African Americans say, I and they deserve everything, everything good. And until we do that, we are putting Band-Aids on somebody's throat which has just been cut. We're just talking. I hope these young men and women who are watching today will take this moment to try to talk together. Many of you can hardly articulate what you really feel, and yet your hearts are full. Talk. Use the language, men. Use the language, women. That is the only thing which really separates us from the rats and the rhinoceros. It is so that the ability to say how we feel. I believe this. I need this. Start to talk. Please. Well, you know I love you, and I'm really overcome. I don't know if we have really realized the dream yet. With the recent escalation of hate and violence and racism, I don't think it's fair to say that the dream has been realized. I think what we are obliged to do, rather, is continue to remember the dream and continue to tell the children, all our children, that this is what has been dreamed for them. I think it is imperative that we take small Black children and small white children and small Spanish-speaking children and small Asian children, take them into our laps, take them into our classrooms, take them into our homes, into the churches and synagogues and temples and mosques and tell them that this is their country. It belongs to everyone equally. This is important. Tell them that they have already been paid for. It is very important for them to know that, so that they can feel, oh, the welfare of this country depends upon me thinking, and thinking deeply, and thinking correctly, and thinking fairly. No, I think he would be as active in 1993 as he had been in 1963. I think that it is not, the statement is, in evil times, the only place for a moral person is on the ramparts, in jail, or in exile. And so certainly when other human beings' rights are being denied, Dr. King, and I would add Malcolm X, And I would add Medgar Evers, and certainly some of the most activists active of the Kennedys, and a number of other people, Fannie Lou Hamer and others, would be marching or whatever would be effective at this time. Marching might not be the thing for 1993. There might be a necessity to devise a new and other way to deal with inequities in our society. But I'm sure that Reverend King would be doing whatever was necessary and whatever would be effective. Yes, things have changed. If we don't say things have changed, what we implicitly give the children is the idea that with the lives and deaths of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, the two Kennedys, all these men and women, Fannie Lou Hamer, that with their lives and deaths, they were unable to make any difference. Then that tells young people, well, they must think, well, gee, these great people lived and they didn't make any difference. What can I do? We must not say that. We must say that things have changed. They certainly have changed. Look at the Black Congressional Caucus. Look at the Black men and women who are mayors of major cities in this country. Oh, no. In fact, including NASA and the struggle to get out into outer space. Though one of our great astronauts was tragically killed in the accident, there was a Black astronaut. One of the leading open heart surgeons in the country is a Black American. Yes, things have changed. Look at Henry Cisneros. Things have changed. Not nearly enough. Let me say that not only would Dr. King be disappointed and hurt, but I would imagine so would Malcolm X, and so would W.B. Du Bois, and so would Marcus Garvey. Carter G. Woodson would be terribly disappointed. A. Philip Randolph and Adam Clayton Powell, the Black men who tried to leave ideals that were palpable, that were tenable, that one could almost touch. These men would be terribly disappointed because they meant to leave ideals for young Black men to emulate, to not imitate so much as to appreciate. It's very hard, you see, for anybody to get beyond the propaganda which is dumped on his or her head. If a person, any human being, is told often enough, you are nothing, you are nothing, you account for nothing, you count for nothing, you are less than a human being, I have no visibility of you, you are nothing. If any person is told that often enough, the person finally begins to believe it, and not only believe it, to say, you think I'm nothing, I will show you where nothing is, and becomes even lower than he or she is accused of being. It is very, very hard for a young Black man anywhere to sit in his home, in his place of living, and in the streets sometimes, and believe that this country cares about him. It is very hard. So if the country doesn't care, if his peers are going down the hole, then he says, well, they look just like me, they're nothing. So that proves I'm nothing. In that case, their lives are worth nothing. And I can not only take their lives, I can allow them to take mine. People will very often try to respond to you on the level on which you address them. So if you say, aren't you wonderful? Aren't you splendid? My goodness, you're beautiful. Oh, you're so bright. People will try, even if they're not They really will try to lift themselves up to that. On the other hand, if you say, you know, you're a dog, you really are so low, you'll never be anybody. In fact, you're nobody now and you never have been. Sooner or later, that person will respond on the level on which he or she is addressed. Mm-hmm. He will say, figuratively or literally, let me show you where dog is. Let me show you where low really is. I will show you that. The levels on which we approach young people, they will more often than not respond on those levels. Let me tell you a story about someone who is known by many of these young men and women. Years ago, I did a movie called Poetic Justice. And there was a young man the first day who cursed so I couldn't believe it. I walked around behind him and tried to ignore him. But the second day, he and another young man, black man, ran to each other and they were about to fight and hundreds of extras started to run away. But one black man walked up to the two young men and I walked up and I took one by his shoulder. I said, let me speak to you. He said, if this is what you do, we do. I said, let me speak to you, honey. If I tell you something, I said, no, let me talk to you, please. And he finally calmed down. And I said, do you know how much you're needed? Do you know what you mean to us? Do you know that hundreds of years of struggle have been for you? You, please, baby, take a minute. Don't lose your life on a Zoom. I put my arm around him. He started to weep. The tears came down. That was Tupac Shakur. I took him, I walked him down into a little gully and kept his back to the people so they wouldn't see him. And I used my hands to dry his cheeks. And I kept talking to him sweetly, sweetly. For the next week, while I was on that film, whenever I'd walk by, he would be saying, so I told you. He said, good morning, Miss Angelou. People will respond, and you must start them young so that these young men and women, dears, try to introduce courtesy into your speech to each other. You have no idea what it will do for your brother or sister to whom you speak, and you surely have no idea what it will do for you. It will lift you up. Well, my feeling for teenagers and adults too is that we should get rid of the handguns. We should leave ourselves a chance to survive. The children, it's so easy to see the violence on television. You excuse me for this, and in the movies, and hear it almost extolled. Here's a Terminator. I can terminate your life. I can end your life. And then to think that they have within their grasp a Saturday night shooter, or whatever they're called, or something much more profound, much more large and more dangerous than that, one of the big magnums. They have within their grasp that weapon, and somebody says, I don't like you. And it comes to this 14 or 15-year-old's mind, I can terminate you. Boom. No, children, no, darlings. Your lives are too valuable. You can't believe it right now. This is the tragedy. You know, it is said that the young people have become cynical. Darlings, let me tell you something. One of the saddest things in the world is to see a cynical young person, because it means that he and she have gone from knowing nothing to believing nothing. It is so sad. We need you so desperately. Not enough adults have told you, you are all we have. Everything we've done, negative and positive, has been for you. You are all there is for us. And not enough adults tell you that. But we should tell you that every morning, while you're brushing your teeth, while you're pulling on your jeans, while you're having your breakfast, while you're on the bus, on the streetcar, on the subway, some adults should be telling you, darling, you're the best we've got and we need you. It is true that one can use the positive element, as opposed to the negative, the glass half full as opposed to the glass half empty. The only thing is, I'm sorry to say, ignorance is contagious. I could only wish that intelligence wasn't contagious. But you have to work quite a bit, quite hard, to keep yourself in a positive mode so that you can influence someone else. What the young man said, I thought, was also really relevant, in that when you help someone else, you are amazed at how much you help yourself. I notice on airplanes, I have almost 2 million miles on Delta, so you know I'm always in there. I notice that if a person is very nervous or gets frightened when there's turbulence, if the moment that happens, even though I'm frightened, if I move over to the person and say, let me help you, listen, all is well, I've been through this many times, the person will hold on to my arm or my hand, and suddenly I'm free and I'm rid of fear. So it's something quite marvelous to help somebody else. You have no idea how much you help yourself. Mm-hmm. It's so painful to see it and to hear it and to be victimized by it, because there's hardly any black family which can't tell a story of somebody to whom they're related, either being victimized or victimizing. I know that this is, it is a black-on-black crime. It is a result. Nothing comes from nothing, however. And it is a result of a larger society being malignantly neglectful. There's no such thing as benign neglect. If you neglect a child, that is malignant. That is an active action. And the people in the black community and the black community entirely has been victimized by neglect. Now, there are always those in any society who will be able to, by virtue of energy, the good luck to be in a particular place, maybe intelligence, not always intelligence though. That person or those persons may be able to climb up that sheer wall of ice, get footholds, knock pitons in, and climb up somehow. And of course, when that person climbs up, the larger society is apt to look at them and say, well, you see, he did it. Why don't you? To all the others who either were not lucky, did not have that particular blessing to be in that place at that time, did not have all that energy, but deserves to reach that high level as much as anyone else. So I cannot leave the black-on-black crime in the black community alone. I know that no black people own the jets which bring crack and cocaine out of South America or out of Europe or out of the Middle East or somewhere. They don't bring it, but somehow it finds its way into the black community. At some point, the thinker must think, why is this? Who brings it? Who really benefits financially? It was my fortune to have a child when I was 16. I finished high school 3 weeks before my son was born. Now here was my blessing. I refused to go on welfare. I refused to take money from my mother. And when my son was 3 months old, I moved out of my mother's house and got a room with cooking privileges. I did force myself to read, and I did force myself to work. I have taken my son all over the world. He finished high school in Egypt. where I was working. Took his first degree from the University of Ghana, where I was working. I realized this, and this is what I have to say to the young women who already have children. Remember that that is somebody. That's not just an appendage. It's not just somebody you attach to your hip and you hold in your arms. That's a person who may have the most horrible life if you're not careful, or a person who can have the most glorious life if you're careful. Just remember that is somebody, and that is somebody's child, your child, and that you are somebody's child. So try to enrich yourself. Don't take no. Don't take low, and under no circumstances must you accept being battered by anybody, including life. And Still I Rise is a poem of mine that is very popular in the country. And a number of people use it. A lot of black people and a lot of white people use it, which it begins, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. So there is that poem, and it goes on. And then a poem just for women, which is called Phenomenal Woman. And I love the poem. I wrote it for black women and white women and Chinese women and Japanese women and Jewish women. I wrote it for Native American women, Aleut, Eskimo ladies. I wrote it for all women, very fat women, very thin, pretty, plain. Now, I know men are phenomenal, but they have to write their own poems. This one is for us. It says, many people wonder where my secret lies. I'm not cute or built to suit a fashion model size. When I try to show them, they think I'm telling lies. I say it's in the reach of my arms, the span of my hips, the stride of my step, the curl of my lips. I'm a woman, phenomenally. Absolutely. If you have a pencil or a pen, please take these down. Take down A Negro Love Song. That's Paul Laurence Dunbar. Mr. Dunbar wrote this poem in 1892. It could have been written last week for Queen Latifah or MC Hammer or
Salt and Pepper.
LL Cool and the Gang or whatever there. Just listen to a couple of lines. It says, the man is speaking, but this is a woman's poem. It says, seen my lady home last night, jump back, honey, jump back. Held her hand and squeezed it tight, jump back, honey, jump back. Heard her sigh that little sigh, saw that light gleam in her eye, saw a smile go flitting by. I say, jump back, honey, jump back. Woo! Also get, Paul Laurence Dunbar, also get Little Brown Baby. Okay? And let some of the girls do it. Little brown baby with sparkling eyes, come to your papa and sit on his knee. What you been doing, sir? Making sand pies? Look at that bib, you as dirty as me. Again, I put the weight back on us. We, the teachers, those of us who are the television producers and entertainment and speakers and interviewers, the professors, the parents, we have to broaden our thinking. We must do to include all the children. You see, there are Asian children watching. Those children need to know that they have already been paid for. They need to be reminded that in the 1850s, the Asians came to this country and built the railroads. They need to know that for centuries, for decades, they were unable legally to bring their mates. They need to know that they have been paid for. They need to be encouraged to read Kinzaburo Oe and Kobo Abe and Janice Midikitani and Maxine Hong Kingston, Ishiguro. They need to be encouraged to read so that they can say, oh, wait just a minute. I'm not here at anybody's sufferance. This is my country. The truth is very important. No matter how negative it is imperative that you learn the truth. Not necessarily the facts. I mean, that can come. But facts can stand in front of the truth and almost obscure the truth. It is imperative that students learn the truth of our history. However sad, however mordant, however terrible, we must know it. The only way out of something is all the way through it. You must see it, read it, study it, and then you can pass through it. You see, it is imperative that young white men and women study the Black American history. It's imperative that blacks and whites study the Asian American history. You should know that the Asians built these railroads, that they were brought here, as Maxine Hong Kingston said, to Gold Mountain in the 1850s and 1840s, unable legally to bring their mates for 8 decades. It's important that you know that. Otherwise, how can you make friends? Only equals make friends. You see? You need to know what happened in Russia and in Poland and in that area. You must know it because you are living next door to being taught by or going to teach or marry somebody who is a descendant from that group of people. You need to know it. Don't hesitate to learn the most painful of aspect of our history. I stand on Martin and Malcolm's show and Medgar Evers' shoulders. So, and they stood on Dr. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey. You see, so we make a wonderful pyramid. But that's why it's always important to know you are in your place because someone went before you and paid for you. There's a new book that's coming out soon on the 9 children in the who went into the high school in Little Rock. It's called Brave Warriors Don't Cry, or something like that. It's going to be out in a few months. It's an incredible book, and I would encourage it for all young men and women, all, just to read what it's like to be 15 and try to go to a school where people are shouting and screaming at you and throwing things and saying how awful you are and that you stink, and then to persevere, to somehow continue, keep your head up, your chin out, and walk on in. It's a marvelous book. Martin Luther King brought someone along. It is important that you see Martin Luther King and other leaders, current, contemporary, and leaders of antiquity, whether it was Jesus Christ bringing along 12 men with him, 12 disciples who became apostles, who then kept the idea going. All the time there were men of leadership and women of leadership qualities who bring someone along with them, always by helping them to see. Mm-hmm. And I believe, too, that if the young men and women who are watching this program, who are there and in the other 2,000 schools, understand that it is not impossible to become Martin Luther King, to become J.F. Kennedy, to become Mahatma Gandhi. It is not impossible to become Barbara Jordan or Eleanor Roosevelt. That is not impossible. It's within your grasp, absolutely. Those were human beings. And so if you approach that with that idea, if you approach the future with the idea that I am up to it, I am a man or woman of my time, and I am up to it. I will study hard, pray a lot, and all that, but I am up to it. If you do that, then in case the contemporary leaders fall, there will be someone to step in the place. You see? I don't think that the world ended as tragic as it was when Reverend King was assassinated. Young men and women are preparing themselves now for the burden and the glory of being great. And you can't say where the person will come from. She may be growing up in a condominium in Hilton Head, or he may be growing up in a log cabin in Charlotte, North Carolina, or in Virginia where you are. He may be Asian, he may be white, he may be black, she may be Native American, she may be Spanish speaking, she may be blonde, she may be black skinned. She'll be an American. That'll be hot. Yes, she'll be an American, trying to live it at the highest level. So don't become disheartened. Just create yourself. Have enough courage to invent yourself. Let me just remind you, I know you're well raised, and let me remind you that in our community, in the African American community, young women and young men in their teens and early 20s do not walk up to people in their 60s and call them by their first names. That's one, you know that. Remember to try to retain some of the finest parts of the African American culture, some of the sweetest parts. Always look for the sweeter parts. The fact that people kind of drop their voices and become almost musical when they talk to a friend or to a preacher or to a teacher. They say, hey, how you doing? Remember that. Keep the melody in your mind and in your spirit. It will keep you tender in the tough times. It's very important. The other thing to do is read. Read ceaselessly. Read. Go into a library and just make yourself a list. Say, I will read from A to BR. Read. All knowledge, my dear young woman, all knowledge is spendable currency depending upon the market. Read. Put it in the old bean. You'll be amazed how it will serve you. When you know you are of worth, not asking it, but knowing it, you walk into a room with a particular power. When you know you are of worth, you don't have to raise your voice. You don't have to become rude. You don't have to become vulgar. You just are. And you are like the sky is, like as the air is, the same way water is wet. It doesn't have to protest. There's a Zen story about a man who studied with a master or mistress for a while and told the master, I want the truth. And the master said, all right. And he lived with him, and he sent him out and he cut trees. He said, now cut trees for a while. So the fellow cut trees for about 6 or 8 months. And he finally said to the master, I've been asking you for the truth. He said, oh, that's right. He said, you haven't told me anything. He said, that's right. So he said, now go out and turn all those trees into charcoal. So he did that for about 6 months. And the man never spoke to him. Finally, at the end, he said, listen, master, I'm leaving you. I told you I wanted the truth. The master said, let me walk with you away. He walked with him till they came over a bridge. Under there was rushing water. The master gave him a shove. He went over. The guy went down once, said, I can't swim. Down again, I can't swim. The third time, the master pulled him up onto the side and said, now when you want truth, the same way you wanted that breath of air, you've already got it.